get a lot of questions about the waterfall harvest that some of you might have seen, and a lot of people don't believe it's real and they say there's no bees in there, you're faking it. So what I thought we'd do is do it right here before you. And I've just turned the key and the honey's just flowing down out now and into the first jar. So it looks like it's working, and you can see that there is bees in the hive if you look at the side window, and if you look around the front you can see the bees coming in. If you've got questions, put it in the comments below. We're doing live Q&A today. Got something different for you with a honey waterfall harvest. Now let's see if we can get another one going just by turning the key like this in the top slot of the frame, and with any luck we'll have honey flowing out this one as well. Look at that, this jar is just filling up with this beautiful dark malty flavours of the heathland flowers here. It's such a beautiful thing. Oh, did you see those globules that came out? There was a little glob. That was a Thixotropic honey, the local jellybush, which is medicinal. Honey often has highly medicinal properties and actually gets sold for medicinal purposes and gets used in hospitals where no other remedies can fix problems. So honey is definitely magical. And look at this, it's just filling up this jar, and in a minute it's going to spill over into the next one. So we just wanted to show you this because we get such disbelief on the videos we put out with the cascade of honey flowing jar to jar. Now in a time lapse it looks like it flows quicker, but this is real time with the honey just filling up one jar and spilling over into the next. Isn't that a beautiful thing to watch? So the secret to this is actually a supergluing the jars together, and blue tack just to hold it into position. So it's quite a simple thing we've done here, but it has this beautiful effect of the honey flowing jar to jar. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments and we'll get to answering those. In this hive there is a bit of honey, which is good, and the bees are they're chilling on the comb surface there. If you have a look, this hive could have more bees. It should build up as the spring goes on, but you can see there they hardly even notice that we're harvesting any honey out of the hive at all. And if you look around the front of the hive, you can see them just coming in and out. Oh, here we go. We're going to get another nice look at this honey just cascading out of the hive, jar to jar. Second jar's just filling up now. Let's see if I've lined the jars up correctly. It should flow into the next one. Here we go, and spilling over. Beautiful. Look at that. Isn't that gorgeous? This honey's got those dark malty flavours of the heathland. Down here, the winter flavours. We're in the southern hemisphere here. Yum. Oh, it's almost got a licorice flavour. Any questions coming in? Okay, if you've got questions, put them in the comments below, and as we get questions on the live streams, we will answer those. And it can be about beekeeping, flow hive, anything related to your hive at home, or if you're interested in bees and just want to know more about them, no such thing as a silly question. Look at this.
Got a question on TikTok, why is the honey so dark?
So the honey changes colour depending on what flowers the bees are foraging on. So if the bees are foraging on really light coloured nectar, then it'll make light coloured honey. So it simply is the types of nectar from the flowers. So there's many different colours and flavours of honey in the world as there is nectar producing flowers. So it is amazing to get different colours out of the stream. Now let's just have a look. There we go, spilling into the fourth jar now. That's amazing. Look at that. Look at that stream. A waterfall of honey. It's amazing how much honey comes out of a single flow frame. This is my father and I's invention, and I never get sick of watching honey flow directly out of the hive without having to go through that old process of pulling apart the hive and taking the frames to a processing shed and spinning those frames in a centrifuge after taking the capping off and cleaning up all the mess and then having to go back to the hive again. Now let's just have a look and see what's happening around the front of the hive, and just watch the bees coming in. They'll be bringing in their pollen, bringing in their nectar, and filling up those frames again. So if you watch them as they come, you might get to see what's like orange or yellow tennis balls on the back legs, or tennis balls to bees, right? So it's the pollen. What basically happens is the bees fly to flowers, and pollen is their protein source and nectar is their carbohydrate. They'll get close to a flower, and a static charge on the bee makes all the pollen grains drop right off the flower onto the bee, and then it flies back to the hive, scraping those pollen grains back to its back legs, and away it, when it gets to the hive, it then pushes those pollen grains into the cells with its head, tops it with its special sauce, and that's its bee bread. Wow, look at this go. Now we've got a difference here. We've got one that's super slow and one that's super fast. You get so many variations when it comes to harvesting honey. Here we are with now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 jars filling up, and the other one's only just barely starting. Beautiful cascading honey.
We have a few questions. Chuck would like to know, what will you do if too many bees come around to get the honey flowing out?
That's a good question, Chuck. So normally we like to cover it up with a bit of kitchen wrap. Now, in this design, it's going to be a bit harder to do that. So you're correct. If that happens, we probably have to take this away, change back to the standard jars we usually harvest with, and then cover it up. This is a bit of a stunt. Normally you don't harvest honey like this, but however, have a look here. There's no bees coming for the honey, so it really depends. We're in the spring here. We've got a honey flow on, so it's not actually going to be an issue here today. But if the bees were hungry, then as you say, the bees could come for the honey. You get a whole lot of bees trying to rob the honey from around the back of the hive, and then what that can start in your apiary is a bit of a frenzy. Bees going for honey instead of flowers like they normally should, and that can decimate your weaker colonies, and also spread pathogens around. So it's not a good idea to leave exposed honey if bees can come and rob it. So keep an eye on that if you are harvesting like this in the open.
We've got a couple of weather questions. People having trouble with the weather. Marion at the Gold Coast, she said she's noticed that there's been a lot of hive beetles.
Hive beetles?
More than in the brood box. Is this normal?
Here we go, spilling into the last jar just now, this beautiful cascade. Look at that. Lovely. Yes, it is normal this time of year where we've got a lot of high humidity, or any time there's high humidity. If you have the small hive beetle in your area, you will get a lot in your hive. It's quite normal. Just watch when your colony is weaker. Activate your pest management tray that comes with our Flow Hive 2, and make sure that those beetles aren't getting out of control. When the hive's strong, it's usually nothing to worry about. When the hive's weak, then put some oil in your tray down the bottom and catch some of those pesky little small hive beetles.
Okay, Russell says he's still getting a lot of flooding of his hive when drawing honey. He's doing one frame at a time and only sticking tool in a quarter at a time, and waiting 15 minutes between sticking the tool in further.
Okay, there's a lot of factors that can affect that. So if you're having trouble getting contact, send us some photos if you can pull the frames out, specifically the bottom cell line. Now, what can happen when you is your frames can get really quite waxed up, especially down the bottom, and start to block the actual honey flow. But first of all, let's run through a few setup things. So first of all, you do need to make sure, I'm sure you're probably aware of all this, but you need to the hive needs to be tilted back So we've put levels on our flow hub here, so you want to make sure that level bubble's in the middle. In this case, it's up towards the landing board, which is showing it's got more than a 3-degree slope backwards, which is good because that means that the honey will flow towards the back instead of out into the hive. So that's the first thing to check. Sideways level is good too, if it's leveled up in the sideways direction. The next thing you want to do is, as you say, just harvest a couple of frames and see if there's any issues. Now, if you are having spillage issues and you harvest all your frames, then they'll amplify the problem. So if you are having issues with that, just go for 1 or 2 frames at a time. And if you're still having issues, then take your frame out and make sure that down the bottom the cells are actually in their closed position, because sometimes what can happen is, let's say you've done a quick closure with your tool, you put it in the top and you've just turned it quickly and moved on, then the frame parts might not be quite reset properly, so they're sitting up a little bit like that. There's a little foot on the bottom of the frame on the moving part. If you can see that sticking up a little bit, then that could be a problem. Bees are quite tolerant to have out of round cells, so what they'll do is they'll clog up this with wax, but what that means is you'll get not enough honey flow down there where it's going into the trough. The remedy to that one is you actually put your frame in a black plastic bag in the sun with the key in the top, and it'll get hot and just move down into position. You can put it back in and let the bees do the rest of the work. You can also use a hot water pressure cleaner to really get the wax off, and that'll freshen it up closer to what it was new as well. But as I said, get in touch and we'll try and troubleshoot with you. Look at this. This cascade is looking beautiful. It's going all the way down from the top now, all the way to the bottom jar here, and soon it's going to overflow into the garden if we're not careful. Look at this, we've got a bee foraging right here on a flower, hasn't noticed the honey. It's too busy foraging on the flowers. It's sticking its head down, getting the nectar out, moving on to the next flower. It's actually walking flower to flower. It probably walked out of the hive and it's walking through the garden. I'm not sure if bees should be allowed to do that. Look at that. It's not even bothering to fly. It's just walking around this beautiful flower garden, foraging on the honey. That's so cool. But what I'm going to have to do is catch the last bit of honey so it doesn't actually flow out into the garden, because I don't want to make a sticky mess to clean up here. Filling up, the stream's slowing down now. So it's an amazing amount of honey that you get out of one single flow frame. It's about 2 litres or 3 kilograms of honey, which is incredible when you multiply that out by all the frames in your hive, about how much honey bees can actually make and produce and get the water content down nice and low. So for those that are just tuning in, we're doing a cascade harvest today, a waterfall of honey flowing right out of the hive, one jar into the next. And I'm showing you live because we have a lot of people, when we show this imagery, say it's not real, it can't be true, the bees are going to come and rob the honey, there's not even any bees in the hive. So here we have this cascade of honey flowing out, and I'm just about to catch the last jar here if we can, and we might have to change that a couple of times because we've exceeded these rack of jars here. Look at that, and we do have the medicinal honey in these frames too, which is beautiful, the thixotropic jellybush honey. You can see the globules coming through. So that's very neat. It means this honey's going to be good for any kind of wound care. Any raw honey is, but if it's got the leptospermum or the manuka plant in it, if the bees have been foraging on those flowers from those plants, then it increases the medicinal value a lot, and it gets used in hospitals where no other medicine can fix wounds. It's incredible. Yum yum. Any questions coming in? If you've got questions, put it in the comments
Yeah,
below.
Tizza was just commenting that they've had a lot of wind where they are. The hive blew over, they had some dead bees. He put it all back together, but is this going to cause the hive to swarm?
Okay, sometimes you can get what's called an abscond, where I've had like a cow knock over a hive and I didn't get to it quick enough and the bees left and found a new home. But if you've got to it and the brood nest is all intact still and you put it back together as best you can, then the chances are you've got to it soon enough and your bees will stay. So hopefully it doesn't cause you any issues. Now, normally when your hive is been together for a while, the bees glue it up and it's unlikely to get blown over. So either you've got extremely strong winds, or perhaps what the hive was sitting on was a little bit not that steady, or the legs sunk into the dirt a bit, or perhaps you just put it together and the bees hadn't glued the hive parts together yet, so it was easy for it to blow over. So I guess if you've got strong wind warnings and you have just put your hive together, it could be a good idea to put a strap around it. So best of luck, and I really hope your bees stay.
Naomi is just asking if the jars are stuck together or are they balanced like that? How did you get the jars together?
Okay, the trick to this cascade harvest is super glue between the jars and a little bit of blue tack to steady it against the hive. So nothing really fancy here, but a lot of fun and an amazing visual it creates. It's a bit like the champagne cascade, but with honey coming directly out of your hive. Isn't that beautiful? And here we are catching the last jar from this stream here. This stream's going fast and the other one's going slow, and that's okay. That's how it is sometimes, depending on what the bees have done in the hive, how thick the honey is, and how quickly it's moving, how cold the honey is will affect it as well, and away it goes. It's a beautiful thing.
Okay, Chris is asking, says he has the opportunity to collect a swarm that is about 1.5 hours away. Is it okay to collect the swarm, close the hive and bring it home in the vehicle and set it in its new location and open it again?
Okay, so I would not advise keeping bees inside your vehicle. You're better off keeping them on the back of a pickup or on a trailer, just because if you have an accident, people might not help you if there's a lot of bees in your car, right? So you've got to think about these things. Having said that, a lot of beekeepers do put bees inside their car, so I'll leave that up to you, but I wouldn't advise it. And as always, wear a good bee suit and look after yourself.
And Chuck was just asking, what did you use to attach the first jar to the hive?
So it's basically just sitting there with a little bit of blue tack there, just to steady it, and it's just sitting on a board down at the bottom here. I've put another little bit of blue tack just so it's not slipping around. It's the stuff you stick posters to the wall if it's not called blue tack in your country. Okay, I'm going to have to swap this little jar because it's overflowed, these 6 jars here, to another little one under here. If I can get it there, there we go. Now we've got extra bonus jars. These are a nice little jar to give away. I've harvested honey at weddings before, where I've taken a hive right to the wedding and harvested honey like this and given all the guests little jars. It's a beautiful thing to do. Little gift jars, something special right from that location. Any more questions? Put them in the comments. The idea is we just help answer any questions. If you want to get started in beekeeping, don't worry if your question feels silly. We all started off as new beekeepers once. And the idea is also it's a great community that's evolved around our flow hive invention, and a lot of people help each other, which is so good to see. So if you've got the answers to other people's questions, by all means chime in and help new beekeepers learn. It's all about helping each other learn and that way we can look after the bees and we can make sure the pollination services are happening and also enjoy the amazing spoils of honey. Okay, do you want to show us the entrance again and see what the bees are doing now? Let's just have a look at around the front and have a look and see whether there's much change of activity. They're pretty much the same. We're harvesting a couple of frames of honey and they're just going about their business as per normal. If you've got a really crowded hive with lots of bees in it, sometimes you get a bunch of bees clearing out of the hive to make room for the bees to do their repair work, which is often gets a lot of questions. How come my bees are bearding at the front after a harvest? And they do need space in order to repair and also get the humidity right in the hive after there's been a lot of harvesting activity going on. Look at that beautiful cascade of honey still going.
We have some questions from YouTube.
So we've got a question coming up here on TikTok. How do we keep other insects out? Now, there are pests in beekeeping. One is the small hive beetle, which we spoke about earlier, and that's actually a little bit hard to keep out. So what we do is we just trap them below the hive with our pest management tray. And you really don't have to do much about it usually, unless your colony is quite weak and there's a lot of beetles around at the time, then they could take over your hive. So there's a tray down the bottom here and you put a little bit of cooking oil in there and that'll trap the beetles as they get chased through the screen bottom board. So that's a nice little feature of our flow hive. And at the entrance, in some countries there's wasps, or they call them yellow jackets, which can get into the hive and decimate your colony. So if you have wasp problems in your area, you probably need to reduce the size of the entrance. And we have an entrance reducer that mounts to the hive, and that way your bees can help defend your colony from those wasps. I don't have a lot of experience with those. If you do have experience with wasps, chime in and let us know how you deal with those. Another thing that can get into hives in cold climates where you've got a lot of snow and the bees are not defending the entrance anymore, they're balling up inside the hive, is mice, and they can crawl into the front of the hive and set up shop in the brood chamber here and make a nest as your bees have probably moved up consuming honey as the winter goes on. So again, reduce the entrance for those with our entrance reducer to limit any mice getting in the front. But that's about it. You don't get issues with ants. Ants don't actually get inside the hive. Sometimes they can be a pain and be behind the window covers here, which can be annoying, but they don't actually get inside the hive. The bees will chase them away. Another pest is the varroa mite, which in Australia we're trying to get on top of right now. We haven't had that in our continent. Every other continent in the world except for Antarctica has had the varroa mite. And that's a little annoying mite that gets onto the bees. It's like, for a bee, it's like having a rabbit or two sucking on them. And they suck on the fat body of the bee, and they do slow down the bee, but what is worse is they bring viruses to the bees, like the deformed wing virus and a few others. So it's, we really hope we can get on top of it here in Australia. In New South Wales, around Newcastle, there's been a lot of quarantine areas at the moment, so fingers crossed we can get on top of that mite. But that's about all of the pests I know of. In other countries, you've got things like bears that can come to the hive and knock your hive over and pull it apart. They like to eat the brood out of the brood box. They don't mind a bit of honey for dessert as well. But I'm glad we don't have bears here in Australia.
We have a question from YouTube. Tootsie is asking how often you can harvest, and do you have to harvest all or nothing? Can you just do a jar at a time?
Okay, you certainly can. The flow hive's nice and versatile like that. You can just harvest a little bit or just even one jar. And how you do that is you get this key here, and if you put it in 1/6 of the way, you'll have one of these jars full about. So if you're not sure and you're worried that the bees might not have enough honey, because after all it is their carbohydrate that keeps them going. They do need honey, especially if they've got a long time ahead with no flowers. You might just like to harvest a little bit by putting the key in like that, giving it a turn. That'll just get you a jar of honey for your family to keep you going, and you can watch and wait and see what the season does with the flowers. But you've got 7 frames in this hive here, so it's probably fine just to go and take a whole frame and leave the other 6 for the bees if you're not sure. But in the springtime you can harvest a lot of honey, and other times a year you also might get a lot of flowers as well. Sometimes there's a big fall flow or there's a big summer flow, and as you see it coming in you can keep harvesting it and storing honey on the shelf in jars instead of in the conventional way of stacking multiple boxes and having to keep all of that equipment in your shed. Another jar is just about overflowing here, so I'm just going to swap this here like that, and look at that, this is an amazing frame. Good full frame of honey here as the honey's filled up all of these jars and more.
Another question from YouTube is the colour of the honey from a particular flower?
So I think it's the Banksia here in the heathland that gives it this dark multi colour. So yes, it is a particular flower that gives it the colour. So each different type of honey has a slightly different colour, and it can range from even black right through to your dark multi-tones, and then your amber colours, your yellows, and right through to even clear. And the flavours range so much as well, and it's one neat thing with the flow hive, you get different flavours from different frames, and often you can bring that to the table and share the story of the flowers and the bees, and it's just an amazing thing. It's like wine tasting but honey tasting. So if you've got questions, put them in the comments, and we've got time for a couple more.
Yeah, following on from that question, there's another very similar one. It says, do all the bees in the hive go to the same type of flower, or do they mix the flowers and therefore mix the flavour?
Great question. So what happens in a forager bee's life, in the last half of a short bee's life that might live for only 6 weeks, it might become a forager bee. So it's going to get nectar and pollen. Now, that bee will usually only forage on one type of flower that's flowering, unless that source runs out in those 2 or 3 weeks that it will be foraging. So it will just keep going back to the flowers. So they do this extraordinary thing where the forager bees, or the scout bees, will head out first, and they'll find some flowers, and then they'll come back, and in that somehow in amongst 50,000 bees in the dark inside the hive, they'll do a dance, and that dance tells the other bees exactly where to go and exactly how far to go. And we can actually decode that dance, which is extraordinary. And then the forager bees will then follow those directions, go and get that flower, and they'll just keep heading back and forth, and it might do multiple trips in a day, and it could be up to 10 kilometres or 6 miles away. And if that flower source keeps going, that bee will just keep going on that one flower source. And that's why you get some frames full of one type of nectar and another frame full of another type of nectar, is your bees will just keep going to that flower source till it runs out, or those flowers stop producing nectar as they wither away. And then something else will flower, and so on. But in your hive, you might have groups of bees going to multiple different flower sources. So you can get mixes in your frames as well. You often get a bit of a mix in your frame. And if you get a big flowering of one thing, you'll get just that flavour in a frame that's empty as they fill it up. So it's a wonderful thing.
Another question from YouTube. Jason would like to know how often you should change your queen.
So commercial beekeepers typically change it every couple of years, and the reason why they do that is they want the real peak of production from a young virile queen that's laying lots of eggs, producing lots of bees, so those bees can go and get lots of nectar and make drums and drums of honey, right? So they want to be sure they're going to get their best bet from the effort they've put into their hives and moving them to the location with the flowers. So they will usually just change the queen every couple of years regardless. As a backyard beekeeper, you don't need to do that. You don't need the extra 15% of honey production. If the bees are doing good, they're bringing in your honey and you're enjoying it and they've got a nice temperament, then just leave the queen as they are. And I've got a hive right outside my door. There's no way I'd kill that queen or take her away because they are so friendly. My kids can be near the hive and it's never any problem. They produce honey, they're not swarmy, and that queen's been with me on the stage at TEDx in the hive as we harvested honey. It travelled around and it must be 4 years old now, still going strong. So no need to change your queen if everything's good. However, if you've got aggressive traits in your hive and you want to take those aggressive traits away, then changing the queen is a good idea to change the genetics in the hive. Also, if you've got a really slow hive, you might have a number of hives and one's just really slow, goes the whole season without making any honey. Changing the queen is a good idea. Bring in some more virile genetics, more eggs getting laid, build up that hive and get it going again. Good question. Got time for one more?
Charlotte is on Facebook. She says she got a flow hive in a new colony about a month ago in Florida, and then the hurricane took a lot of the flowers. Does she need to feed her bees as they're going into winter now?
Okay, yes, quite possibly. Now, if there's no stores for your bees and you've got a long winter ahead, ask your local beekeepers and chime in on the thread if you've got knowledge of that area. But if you do have a long winter ahead with not many flowers, then it's a great idea to feed your bees some sugar syrup, so at least they have something and they'll store that in the frames and that will keep them going over that winter. Now, your choice whether you take the flow frames off or not, but a good idea at the very least to take out the excluder, which is the grid here between the two boxes. That way the queen can roam freely around the hive as the ball of bees moves to consume the honey. Thank you very much for tuning in. It's a beautiful thing to watch this cascading honey coming right out of the hive. The bees have hardly noticed anything's going on, and it's a magical day here watching this honey as it just flows right out of the hive. Let us know what you'd like to tune in next week. If you want to handhold an online training course, thebeekeeper.org is something we've put together which really helps beekeepers go from square one right through to even a deep scientific knowledge in beekeeping. Gets rave reviews. It's also a fundraiser. We've planted over 1 million trees now from profits from that online course. So the whole idea is we create literally billions of safe blossoms for our bees to forage on. And the way we do that is plant things. So like everything, we need habitat and we need more of it. So online training course full of video. It's free to try and see what you think. Let us know what you think.